Karen's hands trembled as she stared at the 3 white sticks lined up on the marble bathroom counter. All positive. Impossible, she whispered, her reflection pale and fractured in the mirror. Her husband, the man whispered about in Seoul's darkest corners as the Frozen King, was medically impotent, a diagnosis delivered 2 years ago that had transformed their marriage into a mausoleum of silence. She found Lee Sung-Hoon in his study, surrounded by ledgers stained with other people's debts in desperation. The amber light from his desk lamp cast his face in bronze and shadow. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice barely audible. His pen stopped mid-stroke. The silence that followed wasn't the explosion of rage she'd braced for. It was something infinitely worse. Time seemed to crystallize around them. He looked up with eyes like black ice, his expression absolutely empty, and said only, "I see." Then he stood, buttoned his suit jacket with mechanical precision, walked past her without a single word, and disappeared into the Seoul night. What Karen didn't know was that across the city, the entire Korean underworld was about to be mobilized for a single purpose, to determine if the impossible had just become real. Karen Martin's life existed within the boundaries of Lee Sung-Hoon's sprawling estate like a bird in a gilded cage. At 26, she'd been married to him for 3 years. 3 years of separate bedrooms, silent dinners, and the constant weight of his absence even when he stood beside her. The bathroom was her only sanctuary, white marble, cold and clinical like everything else in this house. She sat on the floor, knees drawn up, staring at the pregnancy test in disbelief. This can't be real. 2 years ago, she'd accompanied Sung-Hoon to the private medical clinic. She'd sat in the sterile waiting room while doctors delivered the diagnosis behind closed doors. When he emerged, his face was stone, but something in his eyes had died. "We won't speak of this again," he'd said. And they hadn't. He moved to the East Wing. Their marriage became a performance for his associates, a beautiful wife on his arm at functions, silent and decorative. At home, they were strangers who happened to share an address. Karen took 2 more tests, both positive. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. She hadn't been with anyone else. The very thought was laughable. Sung-Hoon's security shadowed her everywhere. The grocery store, the library, even her weekly visits to her mother's grave. A medical miracle? A mistake in his original diagnosis? She stood, legs shaking, and caught her reflection. Her hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. Inside her, something impossible was growing. The study door was partially open. She could see him bent over his desk, his expensive pen moving across documents with surgical precision. Lee Sung-Hoon was a beautiful man, all sharp angles and controlled power. Black hair swept back, the tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. But his beauty was like winter itself, untouchable, lethal if you got too close. Karen's heart hammered against her ribs as she pushed the door open. "Sung-Hoon?" He didn't look up. "I'm busy." "I need to tell you something." His pen continued its methodical journey across the page. "Then tell me." The words stuck in her throat. She thought of all the possibilities, his rage, his accusations, the cold calculation in those eyes as he decided what to do with a wife who'd allegedly betrayed him. "I'm pregnant." The pen stopped. The silence was absolute. Even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, deliberately, Lee Sung-Hoon raised his head. His expression gave away nothing. No surprise, no anger, no emotion whatsoever. Just that terrible, empty gaze that had made grown men confess to crimes they hadn't committed. "I see," he said, his voice soft as frost. He stood, straightened his cuffs with mechanical precision, and walked toward her. For a moment, Karen thought he might strike her. Instead, he walked past, so close she could smell his cologne, cedar and something darker. At the door, he paused without turning. "Stay in the house." Then he was gone. Karen stood frozen in his study, listening to the sound of his car engine starting, tires crunching on gravel, fading into the Seoul night. She didn't know that Sung-Hoon's hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles had gone white. She didn't know that 3 blocks away, he pulled over and sat in the darkness, his phone already dialing. "Minho," he said when his second-in-command answered, "I need you to mobilize the network. Doctors, investigators, surveillance teams, everything we have. What's the target, boss?" Lee Sung-Hoon stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror, a man who'd built an empire on control, now facing the one thing that shattered every certainty he ever known. "My wife," he said quietly. "I need to know everything about the last 6 months, everyone she's spoken to, everywhere she's been. And Minho," his voice dropped to a whisper, "I need to know if miracles are real." Back at the estate, Karen stood at the bedroom window watching the city lights blur through her tears. She pressed her hand to her stomach and whispered to the impossible life growing there. "I don't know if he'll believe me. I don't know if he'll let us survive this. But I promise you, whatever happens, I'll fight for you." What she didn't see was the black sedan that had just pulled up to the guardhouse, or the team of 6 men in dark suits now taking positions around the estate perimeter, or the medical van parking in the shadows of the service entrance. The Frozen King's investigation had already begun. Before we begin Karen and Sung-Hoon's impossible journey, I need to share something with you. Our channel was taken down by YouTube without warning, without violation, without explanation. 3 years of stories, gone in an instant. We're rebuilding from zero, and honestly, it hurts. But you, yes, you watching this right now, you're the reason we're still here. If this story touches your heart, if you believe in second chances like Karen believed in Sung-Hoon, please hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment, even just a heart emoji. It tells YouTube we deserve to exist. We're not just building a channel, we're building a family. And every single one of you matters. Now, let me tell you about a woman who discovered the impossible. Karen had learned to measure time by the sound of his footsteps. 3 years of marriage had taught her to distinguish between the controlled stride that meant business and the slower, heavier walk that preceded days of complete silence. Tonight, there were no footsteps at all. The mansion was a tomb, and she was its only living occupant. She sat on the cold bathroom floor, 3 pregnancy tests lined up like evidence at a crime scene, all positive. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. How could this be real when the doctors had been so certain? She remembered that day 2 years ago, the private clinic with its 2 white walls, the specialist who delivered the news to Sung-Hoon behind closed doors. When he emerged, something fundamental had changed in him. The little warmth that existed between them had crystallized into ice. "We won't speak of this again," he'd said, and they hadn't. He moved to the East Wing. Their marriage became a performance, her on his arm at functions, beautiful and silent, a trophy wife who knew her place. At home, they were strangers who shared an address and nothing else. His security followed her everywhere, the market, the library, even her weekly visits to her mother's grave in the American section of the cemetery. Every moment documented, every interaction monitored. Was it fear or something darker that made her delay telling him? She pressed her hand against her still flat stomach. Inside her, the impossible was growing. A medical miracle or a death sentence. She couldn't tell which. The study door was open. He sat at his desk, expensive pen moving across documents with surgical precision. Lee Sung-Hoon was beautiful in the way winter was beautiful. Sharp angles, controlled power, lethal if you got too close. His black hair was swept back, his suit probably worth more than most people's monthly rent. But his beauty had teeth. "Sung-Hoon," her voice cracked. He didn't look up. "I'm busy. I need to tell you something." "Then tell me." The pen continued its methodical journey. The words tasted like glass in her throat. She thought of all the ways this could end: his rage, his accusations, the cold calculation in those eyes as he decided what to do with a wife who'd allegedly betrayed him. In his world, betrayal had only one punishment. "I'm pregnant." The pen stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, thick enough to suffocate. Even the grandfather clock seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, deliberately, Lee Sung-Hoon raised his head. His expression gave away nothing. No surprise, no anger. Just that terrible, empty gaze that had made grown men confess to crimes they hadn't committed. "I see," he said, his voice soft as frost. He stood, straightened his cuffs with mechanical precision, and walked toward her. Karen's body locked with primal fear. Would he strike her? Instead, he walked past so close she could smell his cologne, cedar and something darker, like smoke. At the door, he paused without turning. "Stay in the house." Then he was gone, the sound of his car engine starting, tires on gravel fading into the Seoul night. Karen stood frozen in his study, listening to the silence that followed. She didn't know his hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles had gone white. She didn't know he'd pulled over 3 blocks away, sitting in darkness, already dialing. What happens when the man who controls everything loses control of the one thing that matters most? Chapter 2. The Frozen King's Investigation. Lee Sung-Hoon sat in his car in the darkness, pressed to his ear. "Min-Hoon, I need you to mobilize the network. Doctors, investigators, surveillance teams. Everything we have." "What's the target, boss?" "My wife." These words tasted strange in his mouth. "I need to know everything about the last 6 months. Everyone she's spoken to, everywhere she's been." The investigation began within the hour. 6 men took positions around the estate, a medical van parked in the shadows of the service entrance. In a secure facility across Seoul, technicians began pulling footage from every camera that captured Karen's movements over the past year: phone records, credit card statements, medical records, social media, everything. Sung-Hoon watched the screens flicker to life in his private office, a room Karen had never been allowed to enter. Footage of Karen at the grocery store, carefully selecting vegetables; at the library, running her fingers along book spines; at the cemetery, kneeling before her mother's grave, with her shoulders shaking with silent tears. Alone. Always alone. But the investigation wasn't just about surveillance. It was about the gnawing shame that had lived in his chest for 2 years. The day the specialist confirmed what he'd feared, that his body had betrayed him in the most fundamental way a man could be betrayed, that he would never father children, never carry on his family's bloodline, never leave anything behind but violence and emptiness. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "A man who cannot produce an heir is not a man." The old bastard had said it at dinner once, years before the diagnosis, unknowingly planting seeds of shame that would later bloom into something toxic. In their world, strength was everything. Weakness was death. And what could be weaker than a body that couldn't perform its most basic function? He'd married Karen 3 years ago, a business arrangement more than a love match. She needed protection from debts her dead father had left behind. He needed a wife to maintain appearances. Beautiful, educated, American. She'd look good in photos, ask few questions, and understand the boundaries. It worked perfectly, until the diagnosis. Then she'd become a reminder of everything he couldn't have. Min-Ho answered with a tablet. "Boss, I've reviewed 6 months of surveillance. There's no evidence of contact with any men outside your security detail and service staff. No unexplained absences, no suspicious behavior." Sung-Hoon's jaw tightened. "Dig deeper." "How deep?" "Until you find something or prove it's impossible." Was he searching for evidence of betrayal or hoping for a miracle he didn't believe in? Across the estate, Karen lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She could hear them. Footsteps in the hallways that shouldn't be there, the low murmur of voices, the electronic beep of equipment being set up. She wasn't naive. She knew what was happening. The frozen king was building a case, gathering evidence, deciding her fate. But what terrified her most was the waiting. In his world, uncertainty was often worse than punishment. Morning came with no sign of Sung-Hoon, only a text. Doctor's appointment, 2 p.m. Don't be late. What neither of them knew was that the medical files being compiled would reveal something that would shatter everything Lee Sung-Hoon thought he knew. The doctor's office was private, expensive, and cold, just like everything else in Sung-Hoon's world. Karen sat in the leather chair, hands folded in her lap, while 3 men in white coats reviewed files and murmured in Korean. They'd drawn blood, performed an ultrasound, asked questions she'd answered with a voice that barely rose above a whisper. Lee Sung-Hoon stood by the window, his back to her, a silhouette against the Seoul skyline. He hadn't spoken to her since they'd arrived, hadn't looked at her. The silence was a weapon he wielded with precision. Dr. Choi, the eldest of the physicians, finally approached. "Mr. Lee, if we could speak privately." "Speak here." His voice cut through the air like a blade. The doctor hesitated, glancing at Karen. "The results are unusual." "Unusual how?" "The child is approximately 8 weeks along. All genetic markers suggest—" Dr. Choi cleared his throat. "Everything points to you being the biological father, Mr. Lee." The silence that followed was suffocating. Karen watched Sung-Hoon's shoulders tense, his hand curling into a fist against the window. When he finally turned, his face was absolutely controlled, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "That's impossible." "I understand your previous diagnosis, but medical science isn't absolute. Spontaneous fertility recovery, though rare, has been documented. We're talking about a 1 in 10 million chance, but 1 in 10 million. Sung-Hoon repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. His gaze finally landed on Karen, and the weight of it nearly crushed her. Or 1 faithless wife. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Karen's throat closed. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, but years of learned helplessness had taught her that fighting back only made things worse. Dr. Choi shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Lee, I can assure you the genetic testing can be falsified." Sung-Hoon crossed the room in 3 strides, his presence suddenly overwhelming. He stopped directly in front of Karen's chair, towering over her. "Who touched you?" "No one," her voice cracked. "Liar." The word was soft, almost gentle, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "I swear to you, Sung-Hoon, there's been no one else. How could there be? Your men follow me everywhere. They watch everything I do. You've made sure I have no life outside this marriage." "Then explain this." He gestured to her stomach with barely controlled rage. "Explain how my barren wife is suddenly carrying a child." "If you were accused of something impossible, would you fight back or accept the judgment of someone who's already decided you're guilty?" Karen's hands trembled in her lap. "I don't know how. I don't understand it any more than you do. But I haven't betrayed you. I wouldn't. I couldn't." Her voice broke. "You've taken everything from me, my freedom, my dignity, any chance at happiness, but I've never broken my vows." Something shifted in his expression, not softening. Lee Sung-Hoon didn't soften, but a crack appeared in the frozen mask. He turned back to Dr. Choi. "Run the tests again, every test you have, DNA, genetic markers, everything." "Mr. Lee, I can assure you, again." The single word carried the weight of absolute authority. The doctor nodded and retreated. Sung-Hoon remained standing over Karen, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the cedar and smoke of his cologne. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost vulnerable. "If you're lying to me, Karen, there's nowhere in this world you can hide." "I'm not lying." He studied her face for a long moment, searching for something. Then he turned and left without another word, leaving her alone with the doctors and the impossible truth growing inside her. Outside, Minho was waiting by the car. "Boss?" Sung-Hoon's hands were shaking, something that hadn't happened since he was a boy. "I want a second opinion, a third. I want specialists from Europe, America. I want genetic testing that's irrefutable." "And if they all say the same thing?" Lee Sung-Hoon stared at the building where his wife sat, carrying what might be his child, a miracle he'd convinced himself could never happen. The shame he'd carried for 2 years, warred with something more dangerous: hope. "Then we'll deal with that when it comes." But dealing with hope was far more terrifying than dealing with betrayal. 3 days passed before the final results came through. Karen spent them in a prison of silence and observation. Sung-Hoon's men were everywhere now, no longer hiding their surveillance. They stood in hallways, watched from cars, their presence a constant reminder that she was being studied like a specimen under glass. But something else was happening too. Small things, subtle shifts that Karen couldn't quite understand. Sung-Hoon was home for dinner, not just present in the house, but actually sitting across from her at the table. He didn't speak much, but he was there. His eyes tracked her movements, not with suspicion now, but with something that looked almost like concern when she struggled to eat, morning sickness making food taste like metal. On the 4th night, she woke to find him standing in her bedroom doorway, just standing there, silhouetted against the hallway light, watching her sleep. When she stirred, he didn't leave or explain. He simply said, "The eastern wing is too far from the main house. You'll move back to the primary bedroom tomorrow." "Sung-Hoon," it's not a request, but his voice lacked its usual steel. "If you need something in the night, I should be close enough to hear." The next morning, her clothes were moved, her books, the few personal items she'd accumulated. By evening, she found herself back in the bedroom they'd shared during the first months of their marriage, before the diagnosis, before the freeze. That night, he came to bed, not to claim her, the distance between them was still an ocean, but he was there. She could hear him breathing in the darkness, feel the weight of his presence. "I got the results today," he said, barely audible. 4 different labs, 3 different countries, all of them say the same thing. Karen's heart hammered. "And?" "The child is mine." The words sounded like they'd been torn from somewhere deep inside him. A spontaneous recovery, 1 in 10 million odds. The doctors call it a medical miracle. She didn't know what to say. Relief? Fear? The silence stretched between them. "I've spent 2 years believing I was broken, less than a man. In my world, weakness is death. I couldn't give my father the heirs he demanded, couldn't continue the bloodline. That diagnosis didn't just rob me of the possibility of children, it took something fundamental from my identity." Karen listened to the raw confession, shocked that the frozen king was capable of such vulnerability. "And then you told me you were pregnant." His laugh was bitter. "My first thought was betrayal, because betrayal I could understand. Betrayal I could punish. But a miracle?" He finally turned to look at her, his eyes glinting in the darkness. "Miracles require faith, and I've never believed in anything I couldn't control." "Do you believe now?" she whispered. "I'm trying to." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. For the first time in 3 years, Karen felt something crack in the frozen wall between them. Not love, they'd never had that, but maybe the possibility of something warmer than the ice they'd existed in. "The baby will need more than a miracle," she said quietly. "It will need a father." His jaw tightened. "I don't know how to be that." "Neither did my father at first. My mother told me he cried the first time he held me, terrified he'd break me." "I break everything I touch, Karen. Everyone." "Then maybe it's time to learn how to hold something without crushing it. Could a man built entirely on control learn to surrender to something as uncontrollable as love?" The next morning, Karen woke to find Sung-Hoon gone, but there was a note on the pillow beside her. Doctor's appointment at noon. High-risk pregnancy specialist. I'll be there. It was the first promise he'd made her in 2 years, and somehow she believed he'd keep it. The high-risk pregnancy specialist's office was different from the cold, clinical spaces Karen had grown accustomed to. Dr. Sarah Kim was Korean-American, warm in a way that seemed foreign in Sung-Hoon's world, and she didn't flinch when he entered the room trailing security personnel. "Mr. Lee, you'll need to leave your men outside, hospital policy." Sung-Hoon's jaw tightened, but he nodded. It was the first time Karen had seen him comply with someone else's rules. The ultrasound screen flickered to life, and there it was, a tiny form, barely recognizable as human, but moving. Karen's breath caught. Dr. Kim smiled. "Strong heartbeat, that's good. But I'm concerned about your blood pressure, Mrs. Lee. It's elevated, and given your stress levels—" "What does that mean?" Sung-Hoon interrupted, his voice sharp. "It means this pregnancy is high risk. Karen needs reduced stress, adequate rest, proper nutrition, and careful monitoring. Any complications could endanger both mother and child." Karen watched Sung-Hoon process this information. He was a man who solved problems with money, power, and, when necessary, violence. But biology didn't negotiate. Life didn't bend to threats. "What do you need?" he asked Karen directly. "What can I do?" The question caught her off guard. In 3 years of marriage, he'd never asked what she needed. She hesitated. "I need to feel safe, not just physically safe. I know you can provide that, but emotionally safe. This baby needs a mother who isn't constantly afraid." His expression hardened, but not with anger, with something that looked like pain. "I've made you afraid." It wasn't a question, he knew. Dr. Kim excused herself, giving them privacy. "Yes," Karen said quietly, "every day. I don't know how to be anything other than what I am." "Then maybe you need to decide what you want to be for this child." The next weeks brought changes Karen couldn't have imagined. Sung-Hoon cleared his schedule of evening meetings, dinner became routine, he asked questions about her day, listened when she spoke about the pregnancy book she was reading, the names she was considering. But the most dramatic change came one night when she woke to severe cramping. She cried out, and within seconds, Sung-Hoon was there, his face pale in the darkness. "What's wrong?" "I don't know. It hurts." He had her in the car in minutes, driving through Seoul's streets with controlled urgency, while simultaneously coordinating with the hospital on his phone. In the emergency room, as doctors examined her, he stood outside the curtain and Karen could hear his breathing, fast, uncontrolled, afraid. When Dr. Kim emerged, his whole body tensed. "Is she—" "The baby's fine, just Braxton Hicks contractions, false labor, common in high-risk pregnancies, but Karen needs bed rest for the next week." Relief crashed through him so visibly that even the nurses noticed. When he entered Karen's room, she saw something she'd never seen before, cracks in the frozen mask. His hands were shaking. "I thought—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm okay. We're okay." He sat in the chair beside her bed, and for the first time since she'd known him, Lee Sung-Hoon looked lost. His hand hovered near hers, wanting to touch but not knowing how to bridge that final gap. Karen made the choice for him. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers with desperate gentleness, like he was holding something infinitely precious and terrifyingly fragile. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. How do you learn to love when you've spent your entire life learning to kill? Can you feel it? That shift in Sung-Hoon's heart? That moment when everything changes? That's exactly where we are right now as a channel. We lost everything. 168,000 subscribers. Vanished. Years of work, deleted without explanation. We're at that moment where we either freeze or we choose to believe in miracles. If you're still here, if you're invested in whether Karen and Sung-Hoon make it, then you already care. So why not make it official? Subscribe. Not for us, for yourself, because you deserve to know how this ends. And comment below, Team Karen if you think she'll survive this, or Team Sung-Hoon if you think he'll become the father his son needs. Your comment? It's not just words on a screen. It's proof that we exist, that we matter, that stories still have power. We need you. Don't let YouTube silence us twice. Now, back to the moment that will change everything. Karen had been on bed rest for 5 days when the world outside crashed into their fragile peace. She was reading in the bedroom when she heard raised voices from downstairs, Sung-Hoon's controlled tone clashing with someone else's anger. "You've gone soft, Lee. Everyone's talking about it." She recognized the voice. Kim Jae-sung, one of Sung-Hoon's oldest rivals, a man who'd been circling for years, waiting for any sign of weakness. "I suggest you choose your next words carefully." Sung-Hoon's voice carried the promise of violence. "Your wife's carrying a bastard child and you're playing house? The entire organization is laughing at you. Some are even saying the impotent king found a whore to do the job he couldn't." The sound that followed was bone meeting bone, a sickening crack. Karen's heart raced. She wanted to go downstairs, but Sung-Hoon had been explicit. Stay in the room no matter what she heard. Jae-sung's laugh was ugly, blood-choked. "There it is, the real Lee Sung-Hoon. But tell me, what happens when the child is born? When everyone sees it doesn't have your eyes, your features? How will you explain?" "The child is mine." The words were steel. Confirmed by 4 independent labs, genetic testing that's irrefutable. But even if it weren't, even if this child shared not a single drop of my blood, it would still be mine, because I chose it. I choose them both. Silence followed. Karen pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heart race. "You're choosing a woman over the organization." "I'm choosing family over fear. If that makes me weak in your eyes, then perhaps you'd like to test that weakness." More sounds of struggle. Minho's voice joined. "Boss, he's not worth it." "Take him out. Spread the word. Anyone who questions the legitimacy of my child or disrespects my wife answers to me personally. No trials, no mercy." After the commotion faded, Karen heard Sung-Hoon's footsteps on the stairs. He entered the bedroom, his knuckles bleeding, his face a controlled mask. But when he saw her sitting up in bed, pale and frightened, something in him crumbled. He crossed to her and for the first time pulled her into his arms. Not roughly, not possessively, but with a gentleness that spoke of desperation. "I'm sorry you heard that. Sung-Hoon, what he said about you going soft, let them think I'm soft. Let them think loving you makes me weak." His voice was muffled against her hair. "I've spent my entire life being strong in ways that left me empty. If this is weakness, then I'll be weak." Karen pulled back to look at him. "You said you chose us." "I did." "Why?" His eyes, those black ice eyes that had terrified her for 3 years, were full of something raw and honest. "Because for the first time in my life, I have something worth being vulnerable for." But would choosing vulnerability in a world built on strength cost them everything? That night, Karen woke to find Sung-Hoon standing at the window, staring out at the Seoul skyline. She could see tension in every line of his body. "Can't sleep?" Jae-sung's words weren't wrong. "By showing this much care for you, for our child, I've exposed us, made us targets. In my world, love is a weapon your enemies use against you." "Then maybe we need to leave your world." He turned to her, surprised. "I can't just walk away. It doesn't work like that." "Why not? You have money, power, resources. We could disappear, start over somewhere your name doesn't carry weight. And raise our child as what? A fugitive son? Better than raising him as a killer's heir." The truth of it hung between them, sharp and undeniable. Lee Sung-Hoon had built an empire on blood and fear. What kind of legacy was that for an innocent child? "I don't know how to be anything else, Karen." "Then learn. For him. For us." It was the first time she'd said us like they were a real family, like they could be something more than a mafia boss and his trophy wife. The possibility of it terrified him more than any enemy ever had. The decision came 2 weeks later. Sung-Hoon called a meeting with his inner circle, the 5 men who'd built this empire with him, who'd bled for him, killed for him. Karen wasn't there, but he told her everything afterward. "I'm stepping back," he denounced. "Min-ho will take over day-to-day operations. I'm transitioning to an advisory role." The silence that followed was deafening. These men had followed him because he was ruthless, uncompromising, stronger than anyone else. Now he was choosing domesticity over dominance. "Is it because of the woman?" Park Min-jae had asked. "It's because of my family. And yes, before you ask, the shame you're all thinking about, the diagnosis that made me less in your eyes, the whispers behind my back, all of it was real. I was told I could never father children, and I let that shame turn me into something even colder than I already was." He'd looked at each of them in turn. "But that child Karen's carrying is mine. A medical miracle, the doctors call it. 1 in 10 million odds. And it's made me realize that I've spent my entire life chasing power because I thought it would make me feel less empty, but all it did was hollow me out further." "So you're choosing weakness," Min-jae pressed. "I'm choosing life over death. And if you can't understand that, then perhaps you're already too dead inside to save." Later that night, Sung-Hoon told Karen everything. They lay in bed in the darkness, closer than they'd ever been. And for the first time, he let her see all of him, the shame, the fear, the desperate hope that maybe he could be more than what he'd been built to be. "My father was a monster," he said quietly. "He raised me to be one too. Love was weakness. Compassion was failure. The only thing that mattered was power and legacy. When I couldn't give him heirs, I thought I'd failed at the only thing that mattered." Karen's hand found his in the darkness. "You're not your father." "How do you know? You've seen what I am, what I'm capable of." "I've also seen you sitting beside my bed at 3 in the morning, worried about false labor contractions. I've seen you reading pregnancy books when you think I'm asleep. I've heard you talking to our son. Yes, I know you do that. Telling him about the world you want to build for him." Sung-Hoon's throat tightened. "I don't know if I can be what he needs." "Neither did my father. You know what my mother told me? That the day I was born, he held me and cried because he was so terrified of breaking me. But love isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing to try every single day." "What if I fail?" "Then we'll fail together." But Sung-Hoon, she turned to face him in the darkness, her hand moving to rest on her growing belly. "You're already being the father he needs. You chose us. You're changing your entire life for us. That's not weakness. That's the bravest thing you could possibly do." For the first time since he was a child, before his father's fists taught him that tears were forbidden, Lee Sung-Hoon felt wetness on his cheeks. Karen's hand reached up, touching his face with wonder and tenderness. "You're crying." "I didn't think I still could." She pulled him close, and he let himself be held, this man who'd held so many lives in his hands and crushed them. In her arms, he wasn't the frozen king. He was just a man, terrified and hopeful, learning what it meant to be human again. "When is the last time you let someone see you break?" Karen was 7 months pregnant when everything went wrong. It started with a headache, sharp and sudden, splitting her skull. Then the dizziness, the world tilting sideways. "Sung-Hoon," she called out, her voice weak. He was there in seconds, catching her as her legs gave out. "Karen? Karen, look at me." Her vision blurred. "Something's wrong. The baby." He had his phone out immediately. "Mino, get the car, now. We're going to the hospital." Then to Karen, his voice forcibly calm even as terror bled through. "Stay with me. Keep breathing. Just keep breathing." The drive to the hospital was the longest 15 minutes of his life. Karen's blood pressure had spiked dangerously. Preeclampsia, Dr. Kim would later explain, a complication that could kill both mother and child if not treated immediately. In the emergency room, as doctors swarmed, Sung-Hoon found himself pushed to the side. For the first time in his adult life, his power meant nothing. His money, his influence, his willingness to kill, none of it mattered. Biology didn't negotiate. "Mr. Lee, you need to wait outside," a nurse said. "I'm not leaving her." "Sir?" "I said, I'm not leaving her." His voice carried the absolute authority of a man used to being obeyed, but his hands were shaking. Dr. Kim intervened. "He can stay, but Sung-Hoon, you need to let us work." He stood in the corner, watching them work on Karen, watching her face go pale, watching the monitors beep with increasing urgency. This was what powerlessness felt like, standing in a room watching the only thing that mattered slip away while being completely unable to stop it. "Blood pressure's not stabilizing," someone said. "We need to deliver now," Dr. Kim decided. "It's too early, but we don't have a choice." Karen's eyes found his across the room. "Sung-Hoon." He was at her side immediately, taking her hand. "I'm here." "I'm scared." "I know. So am I." The admission felt like tearing his chest open. "But you're the strongest person I know. You survived me. You can survive this." They wheeled her to the operating room. Sung-Hoon followed, scrubbed and gowned. Every protocol be damned. No one was keeping him from her side. As the surgery began, Karen's hand gripped his with desperate strength. "If something happens," she started, "nothing's going to happen. But if it does, promise me you'll love our son. Promise me you won't let him become what you were. Teach him that strength doesn't mean being cold, that power isn't the same as worth. Promise me." "Karen, don't." "Promise me, Sung-Hoon." His voice cracked. "I promise. But I need you to promise me something too. Promise you'll fight. Promise you won't leave me alone with this. I can't do this without you." "You can. You're stronger than you think." "I'm not. Karen, I'm not. You're my strength. You and our son. Without you, I'm just—" He couldn't finish. The monitors started screaming. Karen's blood pressure plummeted. "We're losing her," someone said. The next minutes were chaos, shouted orders, rushing bodies, Dr. Kim's calm voice cutting through the panic. "Get that pressure up, now. Transfusion ready, move." Sung-Hoon was pushed back, and for a moment he saw Karen's face, pale, still, like death was already claiming her. The world narrowed to a single point of absolute terror. This was it. This was the moment where everything he'd found, everything he'd learned to want, was taken away. He didn't pray, he'd never believed in gods, but he found himself speaking to the universe, to fate, to whatever force controlled the thin line between life and death. "Please, please don't take her. Take everything else. Take my empire, my power, my life if you want it, but don't take her. Don't take them." If you had to choose between your own life and theirs, what would you do? Dr. Kim's voice cut through his desperation. "We have the baby. It's a boy." The thin cry of a newborn filled the room, small, fragile, but alive. Someone placed the tiny form in his arms, and Sung-Hoon looked down at his son for the first time. Dark hair, impossibly small fingers, eyes squeezed shut against the bright lights. "Is Karen?" "We're stabilizing her. It's going to be close, but she's fighting." Sung-Hoon held his son and watched the medical team work on his wife, understanding for the first time what it meant to be completely and utterly helpless. All his life, he'd controlled everything through force and fear. But love required surrender. It required trusting others. It required faith. "Fight," he whispered to Karen's still form. "Please fight. Come back to us." The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Dawn light filtered through the blinds, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. Sung-Hoon sat in the chair beside Karen's bed, his newborn son sleeping against his chest, and watched his wife breathe. She'd survived. They both had. But it had been close, closer than he ever wanted to come again. Dr. Kim had explained everything afterward. The emergency C-section, the hemorrhaging, the transfusions. the minutes where they'd almost lost her. Every word had been a knife. Karen stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Sung-Hoon? He was beside her instantly, careful not to jostle the baby. I'm here. We're both here. Her gaze moved to the bundle in his arms, and her eyes filled with tears. Our son. Would you like to hold him? She nodded, and with infinite care, he placed the baby in her arms. Karen looked down at the tiny face, and something profound passed between them. Mother and child, seeing each other for the first time. The baby's eyes opened, dark and unfocused, and Karen's tears fell freely. He's beautiful. He's perfect. Sung-Hoon's voice was rough with emotion. You're both perfect. What should we name him? He'd thought about this during the long night, holding his son while watching his wife fight for life. Ji-Hoon. It means wisdom and kindness. Everything I wasn't taught to be. Everything I want him to become. Karen smiled through her tears. Ji-Hoon. It's perfect. Sung-Hoon reached out, his finger brushing against his son's tiny hand. Immediately, those impossibly small fingers wrapped around his, gripping with unexpected strength. Something inside him broke open, not painfully, but like ice finally melting after an endless winter. When I thought I was losing you both, he said quietly, I understood something. All the power I've accumulated, all the control I've maintained, none of it mattered. I couldn't force you to live. I couldn't threaten death away. I was completely powerless. And how did that feel? Terrifying, but also, he paused, searching for words. Freeing. I've spent my entire life trying to control everything because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. But love requires letting go. It requires trust. It requires accepting that some things are bigger than my will. Karen shifted Ji-Hoon closer, and Sung-Hoon carefully climbed onto the hospital bed beside them, creating a cocoon around his family. For the first time in his life, Lee Sung-Hoon, the frozen king who'd built an empire on fear, felt complete. I don't know what kind of father I'll be, he admitted. Neither did mine, whispered Karen, but he loved me. That was enough. Ji-Hoon made a small sound, and they both looked down at him, this impossible miracle who'd changed everything. I love you, Sung-Hoon said to Karen. The words felt foreign, but true. I don't think I knew how until I almost lost you, but I do. I love you both more than I knew was possible. She reached up, touching his face. I see it. As dawn fully broke over Seoul, the frozen king held his family and felt warmth for years. Ji-Hoon's tiny fingers wrapped around his father's hand, and the frozen king finally learned to feel warmth. And that's where I need to pause too, because while Sung-Hoon found his family, we're still searching for ours. Our original channel, our home, was ripped away without warning. No strikes, no violations, just gone. And with it, a community of people like you who loved these stories. If this story made you feel anything, hope, heartbreak, joy, fear, then please don't leave us in the void. Click that subscribe button like you're holding on to something precious. Comment and tell me, did Sung-Hoon's transformation feel real to you? What would you have done in Karen's position? Your words matter more than you know. Every subscriber is a vote that we deserve to exist. Every comment tells YouTube that human stories, emotional journeys, and second chances still matter in this algorithm-driven world. We're not asking for charity. We're asking you to be part of something beautiful, a community that believes in the power of storytelling. We lost 168,000 of you, but if even a fraction finds us again, if you stay and bring just one friend, we'll rebuild something even stronger. Hit subscribe, leave a comment, and thank you for giving us a reason to keep telling stories. You're not just viewers, you're the heartbeat that keeps this channel alive. See you in the next story, if you'll have us.